Welcome to Coastal Conversations, Episode 8. Thank you for listening today. Remember, Colossians 4:6 reminds us, let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. My prayer is that our conversation today will do just that. Well, Jenni Starling is a licensed marriage and family therapist right here in Lower Alabama. She specializes in adolescent, couples, and family therapy and provides clients with a safe, supportive environment that supports the whole person, mind, body, soul, and spirit. I've known Jenni for several years, and I could vouch for her timely and wise counsel. Let's welcome today to Coastal Conversations my friend, Jenni Starling. Hi, Jenni.
Hi.
You are my friend, and we have been laughing and having a good time getting ready for our podcast today. And I know that everyone's going to love you as much as I do.
Oh, thank you.
As a therapist, I know you see a lot of people, but what I love about you so much, Jenni, is that you are relatable, you're real, you're honest, you're trustworthy, and I know that you feel what you say.
Yes.
And you invest the time, and you've invested the time in becoming a learner, and you've grown in this over the years as a therapist, and now we're here. I foresee you being a regular voice here on Coastal Conversations because I think not only are you my friend, and I love to have talks with you, and excuse me, this just gives us an excuse to talk.
Right?
But you just bring so much godly, wise counsel. And I think it's important for us to know who we go to and who we listen to. So as a guest today, I wanted to bring you on as a counselor, and I want you to be a regular guest because I believe that deep down, people really do want to maybe go talk to somebody at different seasons in life, or just, bounce things off of people, a counselor, a therapist. But they avoid stepping into therapy and counseling. As Christ followers, we believe that we're created spirit, soul, and body.
Yes.
And what I mean by that, and you know this, is that our spirit man is the part of us that is Christ-like. It's the part of us that's redeemed, that is saved, that is bought back by the blood of Jesus. And it's the part of us that becomes so much like Jesus, right? It has that God DNA in us, the spirit. But that soul, man, that soul, and by soul we mean our mind, our will, and our emotions are the part of us that sometimes we need help in. We need growth in to navigate so that those parts of us become more like Jesus. And then our body kind of follows. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And I think as Christians sometimes that Christians are the hardest people to convince that they might need some professional counseling and some professional godly therapy in their lives. So just to kind of jump us off in a starting point today, what are some reasons that you have heard that people avoid counseling and coming to talk to a therapist?
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I think a variety of reasons. It's one of the reasons that I stepped into marriage and family therapy among all the other options of becoming a counselor, because marriage and family therapists look at things very systemically. We look at things as a system. So one of the reasons that people can have a hard time with that is the system in which they were raised, whether it's their family system.
Wow.
I see a lot of people who have had past church hurt, so they've kind of been shamed about having mental health problems. I see that a lot. I see a lot of breach of trust with maybe a past therapist has maybe breached their confidentiality, so they have a hard time trusting a therapist. It's one of the reasons I spend so much time building trust for the first several sessions. Excuse me.
It's fine.
I spend so much time building trust in the first several sessions because I recognize we're just meeting, right? And so it's very hard to disclose some of the things that are the hardest to talk about with someone that you literally just met. So I keep that in mind, and I spend a lot of time having my patients get to know me, I get to know them, because that way we're building a solid therapeutic relationship that we can really build on. And hopefully that will lay a great foundation to maybe not undo what has been done with them in the past, but maybe set a different tone for therapy for them in the future.
When people avoid counseling, do you find that sometimes as Christ followers we avoid it because, well, I'll just take all my problems to Jesus, and that's true, and
Yeah.
we do that.
Yeah.
But do you think that that's always do we just stop there? Sometimes we need more. Do you find that in Christ followers sometimes? Like, you need more than just prayer. Like, prayer is important. That's essential. Like, we need to start there.
Right.
But then let's talk through it with somebody who understands.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of people, regardless of why they come in, I think
Okay.
one of the hardest things that people have a hard time wrapping their head around is both of those things can be true.
Okay.
Right? So it is either, they come in thinking, okay, well, I don't want to come in here because I'm supposed to what you said, I'm supposed to, pray it away.
Yeah.
But you can both use prayer, to your point, and use mental health side by side. You don't have to pick. And most people think they have to pick. Like, I either have to go all mental
Yes.
health and I don't pray, or I go all prayer and no mental health. And what I encourage people to look at is saying, those both can be true in the same space.
That's really good.
Yeah.
And that's helpful because that's what I see. And sometimes people see it as a sign of weakness in their Christian walk.
Sure.
That they need that extra help in their soul, in their mind, their will, and their emotions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when they push past these roadblocks and they come in, what can they expect? What can a person, like, for someone that's maybe never even been in counseling,
Yeah.
a center or a therapy session, what can they expect when they come in to see someone like you?
Yeah. So for couples and individuals and families all alike, my personal strategy is the first session is really intake, right? So why are you here? We talk a lot about family history. We set goals because we have to know, where are we going? What are we doing?
Yeah.
And
What do we want this to look like?
How do we deem this a success, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you were to leave here and say, I feel better, what would better look like, so we can measure it? So that's really the first session, if not the first several sessions, especially if it's a family or a couple. That sometimes takes more than one. So we spend a lot of time doing that. And once we've set a goal, we go from there. I'm a very solution-minded therapist, which you know.
Yeah.
And so I ask a lot of questions about, when have you felt better? When did this problem not exist? And a lot of people, while that may sound simple as sitting here talking, a lot of people don't ask that question because they get so overwhelmed and so just isolated by the problem. They haven't had the opportunity of kind of a peaceful place to think about, when has this not been a problem?
Wow.
What am I doing in those moments? Am I at church? Am I in the park? Am I with my family? Am I alone? What does that look like? And what am I doing in those situations that's different than what I'm doing in the other situations? So we do a lot of that work as well.
I think that's good. So helping them reflect.
Yeah.
Helping them know what questions to ask.
Yes.
Sometimes we don't even know what questions we need to ask.
Yeah. I ask a lot of questions. Obviously, I'm a therapist. And I think one of the main things that people maybe have a different expectations of a therapist, and I'm sure as a pastor you get this too, is they come in and they're like, I want you to tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I kind of probably would be like that as well if I
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just, here's my problems. You just tell me what to do and I will
Give me
do
a
that.
list. I'll
Yeah.
go check it off and then we'll all be better.
And
Yeah.
so their face really changes when I tell them I don't do that, right?
Right.
My job is to let's unpack the problem, right? Let's talk about it. Let's ask questions around it. And then let's get you to a place where you can find out the answer on your own. Because ideally, as a therapist, my goal is for you not to need me forever. My goal is for me to equip you with the tools to do it on your own. And so if I'm answering the question for you, it's not going to allow you the freedom to do
You're
that.
not doing the work.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's really wise. Well, recently you shared with me a very interesting concept that I kind of want to unpack today as we get started. Because,
Okay.
like I said before, I foresee you being a regular guest on our little coastal conversation.
I love
I
it.
think you and I have a lot. We have a lot in common, but we see a lot of things in the body of Christ that we need to talk through.
Yeah.
We've talked about boundaries, you and I. We've talked about relationships and going to counseling and what all that looks like. But recently you shared with me a very interesting concept that I wanted to start with.
Okay.
And that is of the learning brain versus the survival brain, as you explained it to me.
Yes.
So maybe let's just start here and how those learning brain versus survival brain as it relates to trauma.
Yes.
Okay, so first let's unpack probably how do you see trauma? Because trauma sounds like a big word to me when people say, oh, it was traumatic. That's that sounds big. But I think sometimes we may view trauma wrong. So how do you view trauma? How do you define that for us? Let's start there, and then we'll go into learning brain versus survival brain, because I'm still learning this too. You're teaching me this.
I'll try to do my best.
Okay, so trauma first.
So let's start with trauma first. So trauma is defined by a distressing or disturbing event, right?
Distressing or disturbing event. Okay.
So a lot of people most people think of kind of what you said, the largest traumas first. I think that's where most people's brain,
the big things in life,
which I think we can all agree are both distressing and disturbing, right? And that would put someone in more of a survival mindset. But there are also things that would be considered trauma that a lot of people may miss, like overstimulation, a school experience. Like you hear all these children who have like school anxiety. You know, school can, for some kids, be a traumatizing event. If you've got a teacher yelling at you, if you've got a learning differences, maybe if you're on the spectrum, like all these things could make school very traumatic. Now, again, the word trauma is used so much. Yeah. So what I try to do with trauma when talking about it is talking about the behavior of the body more than the event. It's not that we're dismissing the event. So I don't want to get that misconstrued, but we're talking about how the body is responding. So there's a very good book called The Body Keeps the Score, which I would highly recommend every single person on the planet read. And
Pastor Chad has read that. He's told me I've got to put it on my list.
It's one of the best mental health books ever, in my opinion. It really just talks about how your body responds and holds trauma and responds whether you really want it to or not.
So what you're saying is this book helps you kind of break down that idea that we talked about a little bit earlier, the soul, the mind, the will, and the emotions. The body takes on those things that are happening inside of those, and it comes out.
Yeah, and I will also give you a video to possibly put in the notes of this that people can watch. And what the video explains is that when your body comes under one of those disturbing or distressing events, right, that how trauma is defined, your body goes into a protection mode, just like it would if you saw a car coming. What would you do? You would get out of the way, right? If you saw something that's hot, you wouldn't touch it because you don't want to get burned. Your body responds in a very similar way. It is very, in my opinion, primal. It is a primal response because your body is just trying to save your life. So if it sees an event or if it sees a situation that's threatening, it's going to jump in and say, like, I got you. And that's what your body's going to do. What becomes a problem is when people have a very distressing or disturbing upbringing.
Okay.
They then in turn survival mode, which I coin as very black and white thinking, very rigid thinking. Nothing can be gray. It either has to be this way or that way.
Okay, that's that survival
brain. That is a very survival mentality. Everything is threatening. Like when you see people that are very defensive, right? Okay. It has to be very black and white. When I see people that are that way, I always ask why. Because when you're in that survival mentality for so long, you think that is normal. And there's a lot of people that I showed this video and they go, oh my goodness, I've been in survival brain my whole life.
Wow.
I didn't even know there was another way. And so when you lean into learning brain, that is more of the brain that allows things to be flexible. It allows things to be more in the gray. It's where you can look at both prayer and counseling. You can see, oh, they can coexist.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to have the rigidity behind it. It's not as threatened. People in learning brain can be more curious. Like if someone were to say something maybe offensive, a learning brain person would lean in with curiosity of like, why do you think that?
Why did you say that?
Why did you say that? Like, tell me more. And someone in survival brain would be offended and be like, I've got to go.
Yeah. I can't have this conversation.
I can't have this conversation, right? And so that's one of the big factors is between I would say survival brain in a nutshell is very rigid, and learning brain in a nutshell is very flexible.
Very spongy. So help me understand as a Christ follower, when we come into counseling and we see, okay, I've been working, excuse me, I've been dealing with a cold this whole week. So I've been working in the survival brain mode. What you help us do is you help us recognize the difference between survival and learning brain. You help us recognize those differences through the questions that you're asking us, not being threatening and things like that. You help us define those traumatic moments in our life that maybe have led to us working out of survival mode, all of this. So can you now explain the difference between these ideas of how they apply to beginning therapy? So as we're beginning therapy and now, okay, we understand the difference. So how do these two things apply? How do you help us through that?
Well, and if I could, I would like to add a third thing that we're going to also apply.
Okay.
Because I'm a family therapist, so I'm always curious about generational patterns. And I know that's something that you guys talk about a lot.
Yeah.
I believe that it all matters. You know, when people come in and they're like, well, you know, I had this or that, but it doesn't matter. I'm like, oh no, it all matters, right? Because as people and as little children, we model the behavior we see. That is a natural and normal developmental process.
That's good.
And so if all you see is dysfunction, if all you see is poor relational habits, poor communication, potentially abuse, the impact of that on you and the reality is that you're more inclined to act that out. And I don't mean that from a place of shame. It's just a reality because that's all you know.
Yeah.
That's all you know. And
Right.
so it's kind of like the Maya Angelou quote of like, when you know better, you do better. And so in therapy, we really, and I go back generationally. I'll go back grandparents, great grandparents, as far as the person knows, because it allows somebody to see the pattern of behavior and kind of why possibly they have ended up where they are. And most of the time, what I see is people giving themselves an enormous amount of grace once they recognize, oh yeah, well, what else was I supposed to do? Yeah.
Wow.
So that generational work is very, very powerful.
I think we discount that a lot of times.
Yeah.
And what I hear you saying is we put the blame on ourselves so much and go into that survival mode and then self-talk down to ourselves,
Yes.
talk down to ourselves because why are you dealing with this? Why should you feel like this? You shouldn't be doing this. And all the while, it's because of the patterns that we've seen, like you said. And so to survive, we go into survival mode. And then our brain kind of shuts down, our emotions shut down. We can't receive. And then when we come to you or a therapist or a counselor that does good work, we begin to open up.
Yes.
And then you help us just see all of those roadblocks that we've set up in our lives and all of those survival tactics that we had. So it's not I think what I'm trying to say is when they come to a therapist, I want people to hear it's not a threat.
Yes. I love that you said that because in my head I was thinking,
It's not us against them.
yes.
Yeah.
And I think what you said is so good because when I start bringing up the generational stuff, I would say more than half of my patients say, well, I don't want to blame my parents because they love them, right?
Right.
Because they've been conditioned to think understanding it equals blame,
Oh, okay.
right? But to go back to that mindset, understanding can just be understanding, right? Of like, oh, okay, that makes sense. No one has to be blamed.
It doesn't have to blame.
Sometimes you may need to blame, and if you do, we'll talk about that. But understanding doesn't always have to equal that. So I love that you said that because that's the blame and the threat, I think, go so hand in hand. Yeah.
So So what you're saying is if I understand this, somebody has to be blamed for the reason that this is. And maybe there's no blame to shift. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's all they knew.
9 times out of 10 it is.
It's all they knew.
It's all they knew. It's just repeated.
And, and we see that in scripture, those generational, some people call them generational curses or generational patterns, like you said.
Yeah.
Your goal is to help us through our Christian walk, but then through therapy, break those patterns so that we can become whole.
That's right.
In our mind, our body, and our spirit. And so that we can pass wholeness on in our families to our children so that we can break those patterns.
Yep.
Because the enemy loves nothing more. He loves that playground of just repeats. You know, he doesn't really have much new things, and he just repeats in our families. That's really wise. So as people identify some survival brain warning signs, what do you suggest they do in themselves, with a spouse, or when their children, if they start seeing, okay, Jenni said that survival brain looks like this. It looks rigid. It looks black and white. It looks defensive. And the video that we'll put in the show notes about survival brain and learning brain, when they see that video and the bells and whistles start going off, what should they do?
So what's interesting about the video is I actually saw the video in grad school in one of my trauma classes, and I show that video to every single patient. It doesn't matter how old or how young they are. And it is a video geared towards children. And there has not been, I think there's maybe been a few, probably maybe 95% of the people I've shown it to have paused, have been like, whoa, this has been my whole life. I've been in survival brain my whole life. And so to go to your question of what can they do, so the video says several things. One of it is stress management, right? So when you've got a large amount of stress that you're carrying, right, on just because that's just life, right? We carry many things, we carry lots of things. If you're in a survival mentality, if even one or two things is added to that, it is going to be a complete malfunction. You're gonna maybe get very angry. You're gonna become very dysregulated. That is so stress management is one, because survival brain looks at stress is a very rigid, overwhelming process at go. Another piece to this, which is honestly my most favorite piece to this, is one of the things to pull people out of this mindset is safety.
Tell us about that.
It's something that not a lot of people think about. So let's go back to the primal nature of survival. So survival is very effortless. It's almost as if, your brain is saying, get out of the way of that car. So in the video, they use the analogy of mama elephants. They say, why can a baby elephant in the wild sit and play in like a pool of water, knowing that there's predators all around just waiting for a moment to get that baby elephant? Why is it able to be so free? And the answer is because it has a tribe of mama elephants around it, protecting it, watching out for it. And that baby elephant knows that.
Yeah.
So that safety gives an element of freedom. So what that looks like, especially if an individual or a couple or family system is coming in and there's one person that's really rigid, I always ask the question, what does safety look like to you? If you were safe, fully, emotionally, physically, what would that look like for you?
If you felt safe.
If you felt safe. And normally, safety equals freedom. And I'm sure you experience that in this space as well. If someone comes in with possibly some, religious trauma, the number one way to help them fully feel free here is you have to make them feel safe first.
Yeah.
You can't, I argue you can't do it without it. If a parent comes in and says, my kid is being all these things, I'm like, where do they feel safe? They don't feel safe at school. Maybe they don't feel safe at home.
And maybe they don't even realize they don't feel safe.
Right.
Yeah.
And with all people, I believe that behavior is communication.
That's really good. Say that again.
Behavior is communication, especially with children. It's all they have. They don't have the language that we have. They don't have the knowledge that we have to communicate emotions in the way that we can. So what do kids do? They use behavior.
We could do a whole podcast on that right there.
It's so good.
We're going to.
So when I see
behavior
a kid,
is communication.
Yeah.
That right there just really, that was a light bulb for me. I've never thought about it that way with kids, especially because they don't have the language, do they?
No, they don't.
And they may be rigid. They may be in survival.
Of course they are.
Because they don't feel safe, but they don't know how to tell you.
No, and a lot of times I see parents kind of saying, well, when I was a kid,
Yeah. I've done that before.
I think we all have. I have as well. When I was a kid, I didn't, have da-da-da. But the reality is this environment in which the kids now are growing up in is all they know. There's no way they can possibly relate to what you and I went through as a kid. This is their reality. And so teaching them how to manage it responsibly, I think, is the goal, right? But oftentimes we get caught up in our own stuff and we expect them to have the same skill set that we have after all the years of work we've done. And the kids are just sitting here saying, can someone listen to me, please?
Yeah. A few weeks ago, we had Caleb Davison on the podcast. If you haven't listened to that episode, I'd encourage you to go back and listen. He's a teenager that attends Coastal here. And I said, what advice would you give to a parent as a teenage boy today? And he said, basically, these weren't his exact words, but he said, give us a soft place to land because we're going to fail.
That's safety.
That's safety. That's what he was saying. He said, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to fail. Let us be able to come to you and tell you that without you freaking out.
Yeah.
Give us that soft place to land. There
is such a good book right now, and I'm not finished with it, but because I'm being so steady with it because it's such a good book, but it's called The Anxious Generation. It is a new book that is out, and I
think I've seen it.
Yeah, I think it's #1 on New York Times right now. It's a pretty popular book, but essentially what it's doing, and it's taking a data stance at kind of the shifts we're seeing with the youth of today. And I know everybody's had opinions, but I think this book does a really good job of putting numbers behind the opinion and why the generation right now is as different as they are, and what can we do as parents, as mentors, as a therapist to maybe go with the problem a little bit differently. It's very good. I think every single parent should read it.
I'll put that in the show notes. What is it called again?
The Anxious Generation.
The Anxious Generation.
It's very good.
And so what you're saying is, what you see in your practice a lot is that anxiousness comes out, and that is a form of communication that we need to tune into as parents. And
Absolutely.
as, teachers and leaders of kids and see that as them trying to communicate.
Yeah, I mean, as a therapist, I'm always watching, even in family systems. I see a lot of high conflict family situations. I see a lot of high conflict marriage situations. And I think one of the things that I watch for is, what are they not saying? What is their body language saying? What is their nonverbal communication saying? Because that's often what's missed. Again, behavior is communication. So I'm always interested in, well, what does that mean? Or what does that mean? It's beyond what is like verbally said. Yeah.
That's wise. All right. Well, thank you so much. If somebody wants to begin this journey towards wholeness, how can they contact you? How can they contact your office?
Yes. So I am with the Leslie Herhold Counseling Services. So that is the group that I practice under. So you can go to that website and find me, or you can just email me. It's very easy. It's jstarling.counseling@gmail.com.
And I will put all of that in the show notes.
Yes.
I would encourage people, if they are looking for a family therapist or a therapist for their kids or themselves, to reach out to you. You book a little bit in advance.
I do.
But here's what I say. I think that when you find a therapist, it's worth the wait. It's worth the investment, because we invest in a lot of other things. We have gym memberships. We have all of these other things. But sometimes we fail to invest in the thing that is sustainable, and that is our relationships and ourselves and our emotional and mental well-being.
Absolutely.
And I think that's just as important as all the other things.
I agree.
So let's learn. We learned today we can hold these two things. We can be a Jesus follower. We can be a Christ follower. And we can talk to somebody about our mental health and our emotional health and our emotional well-being. And we say this a lot on our podcast. What's big to us is big to God.
Yes.
And so that. We think, well, it's just this. It's really not that big of a deal. You will help us unpack that so that it doesn't become a bigger deal. It doesn't become something that we're, struggling with. Yeah. Or maybe if we've seen these patterns in our life of having survival brain, or someone in our family survive, or maybe our whole family right now is in survival mode.
Yes.
coming to you and really unpacking that and talking about it. I can think of no one better that I would send anybody to than you. And so I really appreciate this. Like I said, you're going to come back soon. We might even talk about that. Behavior is communication, but I really want to get into boundaries with you soon.
It's one of my favorite topics. I talk about it so much. My patients are like, okay, I get it. I get boundaries. I need boundaries. I get it.
Well, so we'll put all that in our show notes. What are, as a closing fun question that we ask all of our guests, what is one of your favorite things that everyone should know about? Now, this can be a book, a podcast, a TV show, a food or restaurant, anything. What should be on our radar? What is one thing that should be on our radar?
So one thing, this is going to be so cliche, but I'm saying it anyway because I don't care.
Okay.
The thing that saves my life is my Peloton. I am an avid Peloton worker-outer. I know that's not how it's grammatically correct, but just the music, the energy, it is what one of the things that I personally do for my own mental health is ride my Peloton. And I think everyone should have a very, very good, whether it's a good walking routine, yoga, stretching, whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. That is what saves me. I literally don't know what I would do without it.
So you're a Peloton. I would be so scared. You might have to have a therapy session after I got on a Peloton.
I love it. I do everything. I do the weights. I do the stretching. I do the meditations all on the app.
So do they have so do you do the bike one or do they do the different?
I do both. So I have a bike, but then I also have the app where if I just don't have time, I'll kind of like fit something quick in.
That's cool.
So that is kind of my thing of it really saves me. I don't know what I would do without it. I put all my energy. If I have extra energy at the end of the day, I just take it out on my bike. Maybe some 80s music on the bike.
There you go. Yeah, we're 80s girls.
I know.
Well, and I think that is just a true testament because you do focus on wholeness.
Yes.
So spirit, soul, and body. And body is an important factor in that mental health wholeness.
Yes.
So
I have to, I tell my patients, I practice what I preach. Like I do my own work with my own mental health. I do my own work with my own body, my spiritual health. I mean, I definitely practice what I preach in terms of wholeness. So
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jenni, for being on Coastal Conversations today. We can't wait to have you back and learn more.
I can't wait.
Thank you for listening to this week's Coastal Conversations podcast. All of today's references will be found in the show notes. Also, if you enjoyed listening, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. We'll see you at Coastal this Sunday as we pick the conversation up from here.